Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Today, we have Stuart Swann, Stephen Shaw, and Stephen Figari joining us, and my co host of this webinar, Leigh Rivlin, and I. We're talking about what's really going on in South Florida. And what's interesting is what we're finding is companies are interested in relocating, talent is interested in relocating, and we get hit with the same kinds of questions around what is the culture like? What is life like? And so I'm going to introduce you to Leigh, and then the goal is for everybody to kind of talk a little bit about their experiences, and we'll prompt with questions. So, Leigh,
Thank you.
welcome. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Good to see everyone. So I am also an executive recruiter at Jackson Lucas. And prior to that, I worked at CBRE in San Francisco, where I lived for 7 years. And just like the three gentlemen hosts that we have, I never thought that I would end up in Miami or Florida. And here I am taking advantage of the situation that enabled us to move during COVID and think about where we really wanted to be. So I've been in Miami for a little bit over 2 years. And I also started my career in New York, just like the three panelists that we have today. So I'd like to open it up to our three guests to explain, having started your careers in New York, how did you end up in Florida? And specifically, how did you choose West Palm? And I'll go ahead and start with Steve Figari. He runs Shoreham Capital, which he opened in West Palm. So I'd love to know how you chose this next step.
Definitely. So, hey guys, Steve Figari, Shoreham Capital. I'm one of three founding partners of Shoreham. We're a West Palm-based real estate developer focused on investment, both buying and developing real estate throughout the Southeast. As Leigh and Lisa pointed out, we recently opened up our shop about a year and a half ago in Florida. Made the move here really around kind of our investment thesis being mostly focused around investment in the Southeast. And, in doing that, West Palm specifically was in a short list for us that really was the balance of quality lifestyle as well as connectivity to capital, connectivity to our past networks. Me and my two other founding partners, whether it be in LA or in New York, there was a lot of people who had a lot of connectivity to this part of the world. And for us, being able to be close to that with good airlift to a lot of different markets helped us a lot. We've been very excited about setting up shop in West Palm, and I think for us it was the right move. And looking back a year and a half later, I think it was specific to us. It made a whole lot of sense.
Thank you, Steve. And Stephen Shaw, who's at HighBrook, also started his career as a New York City banker back in the day. How did you end up in West Palm?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Stephen Shaw. So yeah, HighBrook Investors, we're a real estate private equity fund, and now we have our office or our headquarters here in West Palm Beach, and also one in London, and still one in New York. But the New York one has had a lot of people that have come south here to Florida. So I have been at HighBrook for 11 years, and in 2020 came down to Florida. It was very simple. It was actually our CFO was here on spring break with his visiting his in-laws, and the COVID shutdown happened, and he wasn't going back to Greenwich, and then stopped really missing the hour commute every single way. And there was already a little bit of a gravitational pull based on some other, kind of principal level people here at the firm. And, we said, hey, this makes a lot of sense. We had explored it actually earlier, but decided that now was the time to do it. And it was pretty easy to move the team down here. And it's been a great place, been a really great place for us to be. Yeah, so we're in West Palm. I think originally when we were looking at it, we were trying to understand the landscape and say, all right, do we want to be in Miami? Do we want to be in Fort Lauderdale? Are there other markets that we might consider? And West Palm, based off where the people of my firm were, made the most sense. And then also with additional development from groups like Steve and Related and such, opening up the market and basically making this a pretty multifaceted place to work and live. So that's how we ended up here.
Thank you, Stephen. And Stuart, we'd love to hear your story.
Sure. Well, it's fun to be on. It's nice having Steve and Steven on. We're all friends, neighbors. We all have young kids. We're all working hard down here. So we're making a point that you can be in Florida and work hard, and grow a real estate business for sure. But yeah, my background was New York City, 15 years between pre-GFC, Morgan Stanley, investment banking and private equity, and then had the good fortune to go to Green Oak when a couple guys spun out of Morgan Stanley. So I was there 2010 to 2021. That was a great run, but COVID, like a lot of people, I picked up my head, kind of thought about the next decade or two, where my family wanted to be, where I wanted to invest personal capital, where I was excited about an investment thesis as an entrepreneur. So decided to move to West Palm Beach, September of 2020, and shortly thereafter started Belair. And we've just been focused on the residential asset class, buying small multifamily, single family homes with high net worth capital, and starting to spend more time in the home building industry now that things are getting a little more spicy, the capital markets and just macro headwinds. So excited for the next couple of years. We're definitely in a place that has been a changing landscape, and I think it's been for the better. I expect the next, 5 to 10 years, you'll see more of that.
Well, I think COVID definitely helped out. I've been in executive search specifically in real estate for 25 plus years. And I don't know, about 18 years or so ago, my husband and I moved down when we were living in Boca, and he was with Blackstone at the time. And I just remember thinking how different the culture in New York was to the culture down in Florida, and watching him as kind of the only person in his office who would be working until 2 a.m. and everybody else was kind of home with their families. And I would call him and say, every other dad is here at 6 o'clock. Where are you? And I think, and we'll talk a little bit about it, but I think that the culture in Florida has changed a little bit, and that people work down there too now. So I don't know if that's a function of transplanted New Yorkers and our terrible work culture, or if it's a function of just the business and kind of the world that is so interconnected. But we'd love to hear kind of from the folks, from you guys, boots on the ground, what you're seeing as far as like when you hire people, how hard is it to integrate them into your culture? How hard is it? Do you find people walk out the door at 5? Do they stay? Do they work nights and weekends if needed? What are you seeing? Stuart, you were last, so we'll go with you first this time.
Well, I would say first at a very junior level, I had an associate come on from University of Florida. And so I think that was a more simple transition to attract that talent, right? It was a little more captive than, recruiting from UPenn or NYU or Columbia and so on. I think generally with young talent, there's probably a difference in work ethic than maybe some of us who are Gen X or older millennials. But look, terrific add to my team, someone who's very talented and could be working in New York or San Francisco or West Palm. So I think on the recruiting front, you do need to be a little more focused on, for the young talent, where you can get it. And so I think that's looking at more strong state schools in the Southeast. It just feels like it's easier to attract that talent. But look, we've been really happy, and I think it should continue. And I can get into it, but hopefully University of Florida will open their graduate tech campus, which is similar to what Cornell Tech has done on Roosevelt Island. There are plans for that in downtown West Palm, and if that gets built out the next 5 to 7 years, I think it'll be a really fantastic sort of captive recruiting market for financial service tech, or really any emerging company coming to West Palm.
That's great. Stephen, what are you seeing? Stephen S.
Thanks. Yeah, it was a jump ball there, but thanks for clarifying. So we approached it a little bit differently. We moved part of our team down here to Florida. So I'll touch on that, and then also touch about growing past that. When we moved the team, I know a couple of them are watching now, so I'll try not to, say anything stupid. But when we moved the team, a coworker who I'd worked with for a long time, had just had a baby, and he wasn't a native New Yorker, and we were on the phone with him saying, hey, we're going to move to Florida. And it was yes before really anything else was discussed in terms of time, where, et cetera, right? It was a very quick, all right, now with the baby, from a lifestyle perspective, not keep your career in a lifestyle perspective, move and get out of New York. That was easy. We had another person on the team who was younger, originally from New York, had family in New York, and it just took more coaxing and convincing to get this person down here. Which I think was totally natural and fine. But I think since he's absolutely loved it. And then we've hired another woman who had come from Atlanta, who was just looking, had some ties to the area, and was looking for another gig. So all of that was on my investment team, and it's been great. Is your universe as large as it would be in New York? Sure, surely not. But is it sufficient to get great talent and also not only get it, but probably retain for a while? I think yes. The answer is, at least for right now, resounding yes for me. I think where we've struggled a little bit more on the talent side is, for kind of more some back office employees, some accountants, fund administrators, etc., where it's not like there's a dearth of them here. There are many, but some corporations, other, competitors who have moved down here, I think have made that market a little bit more competitive, particularly where you weren't relocating people on the investment team. That that's been tougher, but not something that's been insurmountable.
And Stephen F. So does this feel like grade school?
Oh, good. You can call me by my last name as well. It's half the people there. But
Done.
yeah, I would say that, a couple of things. One is, Florida has grown tremendously in the last year and a half, 2 years. I think more so than anyone probably ever expected it would. And, when it comes to recruiting and for us setting up our business, if you ask me a couple of years ago if I was going to start a business, even if I had an investment thesis and around with a good amount of investment around Florida, I don't know if I would have considered personally moving to Florida. I think I would have been like, you know what, I got to be in New York. There is this connectivity to capital, to recruiting talent, just to staying in the know with so many people. I think historically I always felt like you had to be there. Since we have set up shop here, I think we've been tremendously surprised by both our ability to recruit talent and also how connected we feel being in this market, not just to the local market we're investing in, but also to, the larger market, throughout the United States, whether it be on the capital side or investment side. Although we are Southeast focused, I've done a ton of business in New York. My partner, Doug Farron, has done a ton, up the entire East Coast. And I think as we look at, the recruitment piece, it's interesting is have found it actually to be somewhat easy, and we've had a lot of interest in coming to work in West Palm and in Florida specifically. And I think a lot of that has to do with it's a lot of the other markets have had a tough go, and I think some people are starting to see that they can get good paying jobs, work with smart people. There's always this risk and fallback around maybe taking a job in a certain sub market and maybe not liking the culture or the role. And is there another optionality once you move where maybe years ago there wasn't? And I think today, you walk around, even just my office building, and there's a number of other developers and other of private equity shops that are all around within a couple block radius. And that I think is starting to create that inertia where it's a lot easier to do what we're doing here. On the recruitment side, it's interesting. We've recruited a few people naturally just through our networks, both from the Northeast as well as from the West Coast, San Francisco and LA, and they've been great assets to us. And we've been super happy with what the culture we're creating. I think that I do think that there's a tremendous amount of people in Florida that could be good fits for roles. So we're, continuing to, I think, especially around real estate, having local intimate knowledge of stuff is pretty important as well. But the work ethic piece, I think one interesting thing we've seen is that, to your point, recruiting people from some certain submarkets where there is people tend to work longer work hours or want to be in the office 5 days a week like we are. I think that's stuff that is a little bit easier to put on people and that come from the Northeast or from San Francisco where they're used to working those hours. But with that said, I think it's all about the culture you create because, honestly, there's some people that we're talking to right now for some new roles. And, they've worked in Florida their whole careers, and I think they're going to be great fits for us too. So I think it's all about what we create, what the way that you run your business, and naturally, that recruitment piece to me, like I said, I think is probably easier today in this market than it is trying to get people to come to the office 5 days a week in New York City. So, um,
How many days a week are you guys in the office?
we've been in 5 days a week since we started. Actually, maybe 6 days a week since we started. Generally, everyone that works here is working in the office full 5 days. And like I said, for us, given that we're in a little bit of startup mode, there's a lot of extra hours on top of that. But
Right. How about your firm, Stuart? Are you guys in the office 5 days a week, 6 days a week? Now you have to compete. You have to say 7.
Yeah, promotionally, it would be good to say yes. No, I'd say we work out of the office 4 days a week. But look, my commute to the office, the associates commute, it's all very easy. So while we don't need to be here 5 days a week, I think it's easier to get things done than it is at home. And the traffic in West Palm has absolutely gotten worse, but it's still 15, 20 minutes door to door for me. So I think people, down here like going to the office, and, we're all more connected now with Zoom and whatnot. And we travel a good bit to meet with Capital, but I think we're in the office probably more than we would be in New York.
How about you, Stephen S? Are you guys in the office?
Yeah, no, we're in the office every day. I think that in this post-COVID world, the office, the way that our group views it is, oh, if you need to go to the doctor or you need to get something done at home, then sure, go ahead and do that, right? Be flexible. And, I probably always should have been that way, right? I mean, I do remember starting my own career, right? FaceTime was absolutely everything. We're a small group, and that when people aren't getting their work done, why it is. But no, we're in the office every day. For me, it's great. I mean, I'm a 5 minute, 6 minute drive to the office, which is easy. We have people on our team who do work at the apartment building right next to us. That's literally 50 feet from our office, which might be a little bit too close for comfort for some, but it we also have, people on our team that don't even have cars, right? And use West Palm as their, I wouldn't do it that way. And, I joke with them about it, but use West Palm as, walking around and use it as a real kind of city place. So yeah.
It's interesting. We did a survey and we found that on average, people in South Florida are in the office 4.5 days a week as compared to like some of the bigger cities like New York and Chicago and San Francisco, where it was closer to 3.5. And I think you hit it on the head. I mean, if you have a 5-minute commute, it's so easy to get in and out. I'm so jealous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we did, and I think that this was also partially on the real estate businesses and community that said, all right, getting people back into the office more than other sectors out there, which makes a lot of sense. But so, our New York folks are still going in, but here we do it with an absolute smile on our face. And, they're actually, I think they do too. Probably not as much, because if you look at a friend and you say, "Well, what are you doing?" Say, "No, I have complete, autonomous flexibility." They say, "Damn." But then once they're back in the routine, I think they love it, and they love the ability to get out of the house, and they love the ability to change their day. And I mean, just the fact of being in front of a computer, not leaving some days I'm here in the office and I won't even leave until I get in the morning and out at night. And for me, at least, I like stretching my legs and walking, and then they compound that even more and say you're at home. So you're not even leaving the home for the entire day. In my opinion, that's a pretty quick way to go crazy. So, I'm liking our setup here. So definitely.
I like it.
So one of the, I guess the main question I get asked by people when I've moved down here is, so how's the transition been? What's it like? And what's the culture like? And, who are you surrounded by, and who lives in Miami? So I would love to hear from the West Palm perspective from you guys. How has your transition been? How do you perceive the culture here? Politics aside, how has your transition been culturally in terms of friendships and colleagues? And I guess we've touched on that, but if you want to elaborate on that, and organizations, just the local experience. We can start with Stuart.
Sure. Well, one, we're clearly in a smaller pond, which you could view as a negative. I think for me, it's has feels more positive, and I would attribute that to who's down here, who has real jobs, and you run into those people all the time. So whether it's buddies that are at Goldman Sachs, which is, in Stevens building, or I've got a lot of hedge fund friends that are at Elliott, Millennium, and so on. So Diameter Capital, really terrific firms, and those people do very well. They work very hard, and again, I run into them all the time, whether it's at school drop off, the one Starbucks that's in downtown, West Palm in the area we live in. You run into people a lot, and I think New York City used to have that, right? I always officed on Park Avenue. You walk from 399 Park to you know, 405 Park or whatever, and you just run into people, and that connectivity was terrific, or you run into people on Metro North and so on. And I think that has been less post COVID. So we're in a smaller pool, but I think it has its benefits.
Agreed. Stephen Figari.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been good. I think, we've benefited on a personal level from the fact that, we knew a decent amount of people that moved down, and that I think naturally the area that we picked to live had a good amount of transplants as well. So, naturally when you have a lot of people that have all moved down, I think there was like a very interesting openness to kind of like meet new friends and an energy around kind of starting in a new place. And some people had moved down 5 years ago and probably were looking for a bigger, group of friends. And I think that, or at least more like-minded type people. And, so for us, that's been a really easy transition. I think, in general, um, for me, somebody asked me the other day, like they were like, "How much do you play golf? How much you love golf? You love boating? You do all this stuff?" And I'm like, honestly, I think I've golf exponentially less, in living in Florida than I ever thought I would. But it's part because I'm working a lot, but it actually probably the bigger piece is that it's kind of sunny every day, so it's like you always feel like you can just play another day. It's like I might as well just work today. Where I felt like in New York, it was like I had my weekends. I got out of New York City and I was maximizing my weekend starting at 6:30 in the morning until midnight. And now it's kind of like it's a little bit different of that mindset. So I think we're having to like at least on a family side trying to like block and tackle some timing to do different things because I think it's important that when you do live in an environment where the weather's great a lot of times you got to really make it a point to kind of do those different things that give you work life balance because I think for us coming from New York I could work all day every day type of thing and you need to still have those opportunities where you can go maybe hop out in the morning and go play tennis or golf and come to the office at 10 and that's one of the benefits of living in this market. You should take advantage of it. And we try to tell everyone that works for us to kind of really have that work life balance because I think it's an important piece. But yeah, no, it's been great. We've definitely loved the move to West Palm.
I think you hit several nails on the head. So some friends and I call it summer camp because we all moved down here at the same time. We're all eager to make new friend circles. And there was just this openness to meet other people. I think you opened up with that. And then with regard to, yeah, if it's sunny, you're not going to need to go to the beach every day because it's going to be sunny on Saturday too. So you might as well just wait. Stephen Shaw, what do you think? How has your transition been?
Great, easy. I think the community here, both on the personal and professional side, has been awesome. Super welcoming. I do echo what you all just said with, and when there are other people in your shoes and, you're new to a place, yeah, you are open and welcoming. But I'd also say that, even those that had been here for a while and, Florida, it's a super diverse place. And just within our neighborhood, either people were from Florida or, not everyone is just coming from New York too, right? There are people coming from all over the place. There are good friends on our street. We're coming locals, but we're coming from Colorado, and there's several examples of people like that. So I think that just the diverse kind of backgrounds of where folks were coming from, kind of all at one time, or had even been here for a while, has been easy to adapt to, friendly, and a good place to be. So it's been great for us.
Thank you. And we have So our partner, Chris Papa, who is not on camera, which I'm sure pains him, haha, but he's fielding the question. So we have a question. So we're going to just have him pop
Sure.
in. And
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I know
Yeah.
they wouldn't let me on camera today. So this is from Vince. Anyone can answer this, but how has Surfside tragedy and the legislation enacted in 2022 on tort reform, building inspections, and related issues regarding the availability cost of insurance in the state impacted your thinking on investment and development?
That is not light and fluffy. That's a big one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Anybody want to take it?
Oh, we've been a little bit. So I think that the Surfside question is a little bit outside of my space for most of what we're buying and building, because we're predominantly focused, or at least we were predominantly focused on a good amount of development. So a lot of that, what the legacy building codes and construction types were not as relevant, and even for the existing product, the existing real estate we're buying more garden style type stuff throughout the Southeast. But insurance costs are definitely a topic of conversation, a very big one. Maybe outside of this week's more macro banking conversations, insurance is probably this number two. And over the last couple of months, insurance costs have gone up tremendously. Especially on stuff that's on the coast, as well as stuff that is older vintage and is stick construction in many cases. So for us, we've tried to stay away from a number of properties that just are challenging to insure, and/or locations that are challenging to build. With that said, the stabilized insurance costs have on a lot of stuff that we're looking at are 2x what we probably would have underwritten a year ago, or actually not 2x, probably up 50% from what the costs were a year and a half ago, and probably up 2x from about 2-3 years ago. So some of those numbers are pretty significant when you start looking at these deals. You start looking at increased construction costs. It's why in certain ways, certain markets and certain product types, whether it be development or others, are just challenging to execute on. And there's been a bunch of articles written of late around that stuff. But for us, I do think that there's an opportunity there. And as you look at investment thesis and strategy and everything else, a year and a half ago, we were out of the gate doing a good amount of development and getting a bunch of projects off the ground. And today, although we're still actively looking for new construction ground up development projects, we're also looking at a lot of existing assets where, both for financing and just from an investor sentiment, there's opportunity to kind of buy some stuff where maybe stuff is undercapitalized based on a refinance, or there's just a willingness to kind of move the market. So it definitely has changed the way we look at stuff, but at the same time, and we're all over the insurance, and it's a big topic of convo, but I think for us, it's all about just understanding the real estate you're buying. And even on the insurance side, LA, for instance, there's always been this thought on, when you looked at seismic, what the real risk of a certain building coming down was. And I think in Florida, insurance companies are starting to get smarter on the construction type, this construction year, its exact location relative to flood, and then we'll come up with insurance costs based on that. And I think that the market's really going to see that certain product types are very challenging to insure. And for us, we're trying to stay away from some of that stuff that very honestly, if there was a big enough storm, might not be here, unfortunately.
How about you, Stuart? Any insurance related issues or tips?
Well, I think Steven summarized it pretty good. We're all having insurance costs go up materially. So when you own something and the insurance cost goes up, there's not much to do but bid it out with other people and see if you can get a better deal elsewhere. But I think whether it's our personal homes or the properties we own in South Florida, operating expenses are up because of insurance largely. So I don't know what the solution is going to be for that. I think that's just a headwind.
Stephen S., anything you want to throw in there?
No, I think these guys have probably said enough on the insurance side. I mean, it's part of it was, is this still someplace where you want to invest? That's one part of the question. And I mean, for us, the answer is certainly yes, even despite those headwinds. I mean, I'm dealing with it on several properties and even personally. And the personal one has hurt too. But on properties, there's still super infill nature, right? It's South Florida. A lot of people want to be here. It's why people were moving down from the pandemic, and in an area where there is very, very little land to build. If you're looking from a real estate perspective, we hope that new insurers enter the market, and that this just dearth of providers that are out there right now, we're able to recover from. But even despite that headwind, the growth factors are still positive enough that, you can kind of, fight through that and bite the bullet and still see a demand for really probably whatever product you have. I mean, you know, South Florida is really the only place in the country I know of that's building office, en masse, right? And why? Right. It's new buildings, so they're not going to face the old insurance costs, but still the demand is there, and there aren't many people going spec on offices in New York City right now.
I wonder what it's done to the education system. And it's interesting. I was thinking to myself, what made each of you, because it sounds like other than HighBrook, the other two of you had the opportunity to pick West Palm. I don't know if HighBrook kind of picked that and put that on you, but what made you pick West Palm over, Fort Lauderdale, Boca, Miami, or any of these other locations? And how does that tie into the school system? It sounds like all three of you have young kids. We'll start with you, Stuart. You always go first. I don't know if that's good or bad.
Yeah, happy to take the mic. Look, it was a big factor for my family. And long story short, the school that my daughter's at, the head of school actually was a teacher at my high school. So I had that connectivity before I moved down, and that was absolutely an influence on picking West Palm Beach because I was excited about the school and where he was taking it. Look, there's very positives and there's a big negative with the immigration as it relates to schools. On the positive, I think all the schools, public and private, are raising the bar academically. And I think, where my daughter is, I feel that it is absolutely on par with schools in the tri-state area. So we're very happy with that. I think you're seeing, you know, private donations, the endowments, annual funds for these schools see a significant jump, which is really tremendous. And it helps when you have a lot of hedge fund managers, living in Palm Beach and want to get their kids into school.
Certainly doesn't hurt. Right?
Yeah. So that's all positive. Look, the negative, especially as you look at the forward trajectory of West Palm, is how much confidence do Gen X and millennials who are considering a relocation to Florida, how much confidence do they have that they can get their kids into school, the school that they want to get them into? And, if you're living in Westchester, Connecticut, or let's say suburban New Jersey, that age worker probably already has their kids in schools that they're happy with, public and private. And let's say if Goldman's trying to move another 200 or 500 employees down, that 40, 45, 50-year-old employee with kids that are grade school, they're really concerned about getting spots for their kids. And, I think the only way to really solve that's more supply. And you've got, a couple developers helping on that front. Jeff Green, for example, started a private school in West Palm. The Green School, Stephen Ross has, I think, been working behind the scenes to try to maybe get a big private school done down here. So we'll see. But it's a big challenge. And I think it's tough when people feel like they're rolling the dice on a move and not knowing for certain if they have their kids in school.
Right. It's everything, right? So I feel like for anybody listening who's ready to open a school, it sounds like there might be some real demand for that. Stephen Shaw, how did you find it with picking West Palm and then getting your kids into school? Was it a struggle?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't had to fight the school battle yet, which I don't know if, like Stuart was saying, I don't know if I'm lucky for that or if I'm actually facing a bigger wave when I am. I did see in Manhattan, for example, I mean, we had someone who was general counsel at HighBrook that I probably didn't see him work for 3 months because he was running around with his wife to every single private school in Manhattan trying to get them into school. And, you cast as wide of a net as possible and you go, you know, hope they let you into a couple, and then you pick, which one you like better, right? So I noticed that. I was like, oh man, this is something I don't necessarily want to go through. And it looks like, you kind of do need to go through a bit of that dog and pony show down here, just because what Stuart said, the supply is probably not there, and the school infrastructure has some serious catching up to do. So I'll stop there because I haven't had to do it, but that's been my take. So
And
I have another question, if you don't mind. From Andre Haas. How did industry friends that opened up one-person satellite offices for their New York firms fare in South Florida?
all right, Figari, you're up. You missed the school question, so you get to answer that
Oh,
one.
I'm sorry. I thought you got Steve.
Okay, you can answer both. Go ahead.
Can answer both. On the school side, it's definitely, if I were to say, in terms of the growth here, I think obviously there's a certain demographic where it doesn't apply, but for a good amount of people who are pretty established in their careers, I do think it's a tremendous missing or a piece that needs probably one of the biggest pieces of work. So I do think over the next couple of years, there's going to be a good amount of announcements just because the demand is there. We have found it to be extremely competitive on the private school side. And on the public school side, I think, we've explored it. I don't know if it's necessarily the right fit for us for the location where we're living, but at the same time, I do think that there are a good amount of public schools that I think are perfectly appropriate and comparable to, if I were to live in the suburbs of New York, it'd be comparable in terms of quality of what it is. But, is definitely a piece here that, there's wait lists on every single school. It's a very competitive process in the private school space. But, with that said, I personally think in the next couple of years, you're going to see a good amount of change on it. I also think too, interestingly, when you look at when I look at people that have moved, I don't know a ton of people who have moved when their kids are in like middle school and high school. I just think like at that point, the uprooting of a family is a lot more challenging conversation. And you're either moving for big dollars or for necessity as opposed to like maybe by like choice. So I think what I've seen is it's very competitive in like the 2s and 3s and 4s and 5-year olds, just getting in. And I think naturally like those are easy groups to like expand over time as they recruit in these schools, and they can expand as the kids grow. So I think in the next like year or two, you'll see that will probably be less on people's tongues, and I think it'll be more about housing and affordability and other items there. So, that's my thoughts. Chris, if you don't mind, repeat your question
Sure.
again, because I got a little bit on a tangent.
No, I liked it. Yes, from Andre Haas. How did industry friends that opened up one-person satellite offices for their New York firms fare in South Florida?
No, I don't know too many that really open up like true satellite. I know some people that moved down for a couple months during COVID and then stayed down. A lot of them, majority of them, I think, are still here. There's a few that did go back. Um, I think it really comes down to like the business and that work from home concept, because I do think the more liberal a business is around the flexibility of working from home, I think that the people that I do know that came down here and had that flexibility have really taken advantage of it. They said, you know what, I'm ripping up New York, or I'm ripping up San Diego, or not San Diego, but San Francisco, and I'm gonna stay down in Florida and embrace the balance. I also have friends that moved down working from home, and after being here for a year, got so sticky with it. They're like, you know what, Bloomberg is calling me back, but you know what, I'm going to stay here because I think I'd still get a job here and be happy, and I love the lifestyle. And the New York I lived in isn't the New York that I'm used to, and a lot of my friends have either. Because that's the other thing too for us is like, even if we were still in New York, majority of my friends moved out of New York during COVID, and they haven't come back. They've moved to Greenwich, to Westchester, to Nassau County, and because of that, the New York that we were in probably isn't what we were used to anyway. So there would have been, it'd be interesting to see what other people think about moving to Nassau County on Long Island and how they like their commute into New York City 3 days a week. Because I think the work-life balance for me is probably a little bit better.
I suspect you're right on that. It's interesting what you mentioned about the affordability. And I feel like in New York, obviously, and a lot of other places, we're facing this housing shortage, and we're facing, the need for affordable housing. What are you guys seeing on the ground there? Are any of you involved in any affordable housing yet?
So we're residential focused as developers. So we're building in a number of markets, what we consider to be predominantly entry-level new construction housing in those markets. In West Palm Beach specifically, we're not currently building anything. We are looking at some projects, although given construction costs, that stuff will probably be more like workforce or maybe slightly above that, housing on that side. But we're developing all rental. There is a tremendous need in all these markets for, I think, just like newer quality housing, very honestly. I think that there's a good amount of housing, in, for instance, the markets that we live in right now. It's just, the issue in West Palm right now is that a lot of it is legacy 1950s, 60s built stuff. And, it's a lot of, people's grandparents' house that passed away. And, that's the house that's on the market as opposed to, or the house that's for rent as opposed to something that, is a little bit more modern. So, for us, we're not as focused on this submarket, but, I think in the other submarkets of Florida, there's a tremendous opportunity for rental housing. And, that's our thesis. It's like people are moving here. They want newer construction, whether it's a single family home in Orlando, where we're building communities of them for rent, 100, 200, 300 homes all in a community with a robust set of amenities for rent. We're doing it because it meets the demographic need. And, for us, we're building to a product type that I think most people moving down, aspire to live in. And when you compare it to a New York City rental apartment, for us, it feels pretty interesting.
How about you, Stuart? Are you working on anything in that space?
Yeah. So, I mean, some of the residential that we've bought, I would say we've got a concentration of apartments in Lake Worth, which is the town just south of West Palm, which at least in 2021, when we started buying, I would say was a value alternative to West Palm. Prices have absolutely moved there. I'd say rents have moved close to 50% in 2 years in Lake Worth. But, I'd say the average monthly rent in that market still feels decently affordable. So I would say $1,000 a bedroom. But look, I think single family homes, especially east of I-95, are increasingly unaffordable. And a lot of them are being, kind of as Steve said, because of their 1950s one-story ranches, a lot of those are being bought and torn down, and new modern is being built back. But the result of that is very expensive housing product for, if you're looking to buy a home, again, east of 95, close to the beach. So I don't think it's any different than Miami. I think the value option is renting. There's a lot of multifamily supply coming in Palm Beach. So I think for people moving down, you'll see more of them ending up maybe renting a 2 or 3 bedroom that's in a new construction building on the intercoastal, which is beautiful and has amenities and full service like you'd get in New York. But they're not going to get that dream house that maybe their family had hoped for with a 10-minute commute to work.
I wonder what one of those would go for. Any ideas on the bedrooms per bedroom? Which I haven't heard as a metric, by the way. I feel like that's a really interesting way of, usually it's square foot.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say probably a 2-bedroom. And for example, one of Related's new, they have a 2-tower development in Northwood, which is the north part of West Palm, that's on a marina, beautiful new product. So I'd assume there it's probably $2,000 a bed. So $4,000 for a 2-bedroom unit.
On the water, it's pretty nice.
Yeah.
How about you, Stephen Shaw? Anything that you're working on down there in that space?
On the affordable side, there, like I said, I mean, on the residential piece, we're really just developers of single family rental property. We don't do much on the multi side down here. I think we would, but so on the single family rental, yeah, I mean, the target market is, kind of workforce, right? Or, workforce plus. And, because of just lack of availability of dirt, there's not much that's out there to do. So when we think of Florida and we're focused more on the residential side, it's Orlando, it's Tampa, even Jacksonville. I think we would love to do more here, but there's, there are a decent amount of eyeballs on it, particularly in Miami. And, it's just has not been our main focus, just given that they're, probably easier places to do business elsewhere. Not necessarily saying that that's, the absolute right investment choice, but that's just based on, eyeballs to where we can differentiate ourselves. It hasn't been our focus.
Well, thank you. I'm trying to see if we have any other questions. Anything else in the chat box there, Chris?
Nothing right now.
All right. Excellent. Leigh, is there anything else that we were going to, I mean, I could talk to people all day long, but was there anything else that I'm missing?
We've talked on the major subjects. I think just our last question is really the purpose of the webinar today. And, based on your experience here and what you've seen firsthand, do you believe that the boom that we've seen will continue and that people will stay? We can start with Steve Figari.
Yeah, I do. I actually think this is like, at least for, West Palm specifically, like to me, this is like the second inning. I don't think that I think when you look at the amount of development that's been talked about, and not to make this like purely a real estate talk, even though it kind of has been, the amount of development that's happening and planned for this market specifically, the amount of like personal investment from, the related New York team and Jeff Green and a couple other people. To me, this is going to be a very different city a couple of years from now, and I think naturally, that's only going to accelerate a lot of what we talked about. To me, I feel like even when you look at some of these markets, and I had even sticker shock when I looked at how much houses had gone up in price, over a 2-year period, and but at the same time, I kind of understand it and believe it, as wild as it sounds, because to me, when you look at any other market and you have a top city, if you live that close and in a house that size and what you get, but houses should cost, and very honestly, in a lot of markets, it costs a lot more. So, I think there's an interesting movement that's happened, and, I think it's really just beginning, and, I think we're here for the long haul relative to it, and, embracing it. I think this market is a great market, regardless if your business is West Palm only, or if you're trying to get all across the state or all across the country. It's got, the airlift between Lauderdale and New York, and even sometimes Miami for us. It's super easy. And, like I said, the connectivity to so many people, whether it just be real estate, friends, family, that come through what I call like the Jupiter to Miami market is mind blowing. I actually have more dinners of more people from the Northeast and from even like California of late, to the point where I'm like, I got to say no now. I'm like, you know what? I'll see you next time you come down, because there's that many people I feel like that come through so often. So I think that's, it's a pretty cool thing there. And I think that, like I said, we're early on that end. And it's funny that all my West Palm friends that have lived here for a while are like, they all think we came in late, but I'm like, I'm like, you should be happy your house went up a lot in value.
Yep. Yeah. With regard to people coming through, I think I've only seen non-Florida people in the past week because of spring break. Everyone's coming through right now seriously, every night for the past week. It's fun. It's a fun situation to be in. Get to see all of your friends, but it's a lot.
You feel like you miss people. You just show up to one of the big hotels in Boca and or Miami or in Palm Beach. You'll run into 15 people. That's my take.
Exactly. Stuart, what do you think? What are your views in the future?
Yeah, look, I was bullish when I set up shop here 2 years ago and remain equally bullish. But there are external factors here that I don't control that I think will have a big influence on how much growth we see. And probably three things. One's related. They have a monopoly on the office market in West Palm. And how successful is Stephen Ross bringing more tenants down or getting groups like Goldman Sachs to go from 200 employees to 1,000? That's going to have a big impact on the growth. Second is really Miami and the connectivity to Miami. So I view West Palm a little bit like Greenwich in New York City. So, rising tide, if Miami keeps growing, you get more tech in Miami, you get more firms like Citadel, having HQs there, it'll help West Palm. I mean, we're a 75-minute, bright line train trip from Miami. It's, 60 miles on I-95, which can take 3 hours or an hour and 15. But, I think that connectivity is good. And again, as Steven said, you've got a lot of airport options between PBI, Fort Lauderdale, and Miami, which is great. And then thirdly, the Florida Tech campus I mentioned, West Palm needs to get that done. Jeff Green, it's been in the press that he's now maybe retrading. He was donating 5 acres of land as part of the assemblage that the city and the county were giving Florida for this campus. And I think he wants naming rights on the whole campus, and Florida maybe was going to give him a building. And so that needs to play out. It seems like a negotiation is going on, but 7 years from now, if that's up and running, it helps fill a hole in downtown West Palm. So the site is a little bit west of downtown. So I think it'd make a more cohesive downtown. And most importantly, it would again give recruiting grounds to financial service firms down here. So hopefully they can figure out their disagreements and get that going.
Maybe build out a real estate school while they're at it.
And yeah, I mean, it lasts for me. I mean, my litmus test is I don't want to go anywhere. And, 99% of the people that I know don't want to go anywhere. So I think that speaks more to, can West Palm retain the influence of people that have come? And I think the resounding answer is yes. I think Stuart brought up a good point that said, all right, well, can the growth continue? I mean, the development pipeline suggests absolutely. And, with Related's, very tight hold on this market, they probably do have, I'd say, a better insight in terms of, what decision makers are thinking of. So, I'll probably take them at their word and, hope it all works out. But, I think that it's a fantastic place to be. There are other factors like, weather and hurricanes and insurance that we all talked about. I mean, I think all of those are certainly risk factors that could slow growth down. But all in all, I think that if you can kind of boil down what the three of us and Leigh have experienced living here in South Florida, it ain't bad. So encourage people to, if you're on the fence, to check it out because it's been a great place to be.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll tell you, boots on the ground as a recruiter, there are more people every day saying, I want to investigate relocating down to South Florida. What would it be like if I moved my company down to South Florida? And we do a lot of those projects. And I feel like the sentiment of people, especially in the Northeast, is like, that's where they're headed, young and old. So it's, I would buy in for the staying power as well.
Yeah, a lot of candidates will say I would like to be in New York or South Florida.
Right.
Yeah. Intertwined now.
Sometimes July and August we'll hear more for New York, but I
Yeah.
feel like we're going through the winter. There's definitely a lot of hope for Florida. So anyway, do we have any other questions from anyone, audience or otherwise?
We're all set over here.
Excellent. Okay. Well, then I'm going to just take this moment to thank all three of our panelists, Stuart, Stephen, and Stephen. Leigh and I really appreciated having you on. I think this was great. And it's very clear that the three of you love working and living there. So thank you for your time.